Good morning.
Good morning.
And Happy New Year. Any of you make New Yes, sir. Seriously, already? Don is supposed to raise his hand if I speak too fast.
Listen faster.
He has told me on more than one occasion I can speak faster than he can hear. So he is your guide. Did any of you make New Year's resolutions this year? You know, standard, lose weight, eat better, exercise more, be healthy, all those things. This year, my New Year's resolution is to get rid of all my excuses. I am an expert excuse maker. I can come up with very creative ways to not do things. This list is way too long for me to give it to you now, and I don't want any of you using it later anyway. Now, it might sound like a great way to live to avoid doing things, but I run into trouble quite frequently when God has other plans for me and has things He wants me to do. He does not accept my excuses. So today, we're going to talk about the voice of God and how He handles my bad behavior. So let's start with the basics. How do we know when God is speaking to us? How do we tell the difference between our conscience, which is generally society-based, our own ideas, which we can come up with many, or something that God is truly calling us to do? It's pretty easy to see our half of this conversation. We pray to God. We give Him our concerns, we give Him our praises, we give Him our desires, our hopes, our wishes. We ask Him to help us, to help our loved ones, to help friends, and then all those people we don't know that really need His help. And then there's times we just talk to Him. Talk about our lives, our hopes, about our dreams, things we're confused on. We ask Him to make them clear in our lives. We ask for His We ask for His guidance. I'm slowing down. And what does He want to do with our lives? We ask Him for help on those difficult conversations we need to have, whether it's with family or coworkers. So as you see, it is really no problem seeing our half of this conversation. But how do we know when He answers us? What does the voice of God really sound like to each of us? So in our reading today, Elijah was in a bit of trouble. They were trying to kill him, and he wanted to talk to God. He was set off to the mountains to find God and to hear from Him. He was so desperate that he just laid down to die. He did not know what to do with his life or how to handle his situation. So the Lord sent an angel and told Elijah to eat and keep going so that he could be strong enough for the journey that was ahead of him. Elijah needed to talk to God, but more importantly, he needed to hear from Him. He needed to know what God had in store for him. The Lord told him to go into the cave and come out when he heard God's voice. And I'm sure Elijah had the exact same question that we're discussing today. What does God's voice sound like? First, there was a great and powerful wind. Storms really loud, especially here in Ohio, but Elijah did not hear God's voice in that wind. Next was an earthquake. It's pretty hard to ignore an earthquake, but Elijah again did not hear God's voice in it. And then a roaring fire. Still, Elijah did not hear God's voice. And finally came a quiet, gentle whisper. And immediately, Elijah put on his cloak and went out to talk to God. I believe this is how God speaks to me, in that small, quiet, gentle whisper that would be easily ignored or missed if I was not looking to hear it. So, while getting ready today, I went to find the approved method for hearing God's voice, and I went to Google. Google, I like my new voice app. Google, what is the accepted method to hear from God? And as you might imagine, there is no one accepted method to hear from God. So I have
1 million hits.
1 million hits. So I went back and looked at how I personally find things that are useful to help me hear God's voice. First and foremost is you need to have a relationship with God. Now, discussing to have a relationship with God is a totally different sermon, and we're not going to do that today. But let's start with some things that you have to just start as basics. First, you have to accept Jesus Christ as your Savior. You have to know Him. You have to spend time in God's Word, in the Bible. You need to share fellowship with other Christians. You need to get to know God. You need to let Him into your life, and you need to let Him dwell in your heart. That is how you learn what He has in store for you and how to hear from Him. He doesn't change. He does the way He's done it for the entire history of time. You need to know how that is in your life. Second is persistence. When God wants me to do something, He is very persistent. It is not a fleeting idea. It sticks with me until I do something about it. When I'm trying to decide if God is talking to me, I take time to think it through. I pray on it. I talk to other Christians like you guys. And if it is truly time spent from God, time is well spent trying to decide His voice. And third, circumstances and timing. When I pray for something, or when you pray for something, do not be surprised when it is answered. Do not make excuses or downplay the event. Acknowledge that this answer is from God and move along the path that He has given you. So, now I want to give you some examples of how this has happened in my life when God has wanted me to do something. So let's start with the first time I remember God explicitly telling me to do something. In my life, God's voice is sometimes this quiet whisper, and sometimes it's more of a 2x4 to the back of the head. In this case, God and I were not in agreement on what I was going to do. Several years ago, when I was young in my faith and not used to hearing God talk to me and tell me things, and Nathan was really sick, we had met several other families and became really close to them. In one of these instances, one of these moms got on Facebook to tell the world that her daughter was going to the hospital and wasn't coming home. I immediately heard in the back of my head this small, quiet voice that I should call her. I should be there because I would understand. And I have to admit that that was the last thing I wanted to do. I did not want to face one of my greatest fears directly with my eyes for a friend of mine. So I was pretty sure that there was absolutely no way I was ever going to call this mother. I had all of my excuses lined up. Not family, she doesn't want me there, we weren't that close anyway, and the one that you can use in any example is, I would just be in the way. My excuses were as long as my desire was to not call this mother. So at the time of this interaction, I was in my stained glass studio making a pretty easy piece of stained glass and immediately broke a glass. Now, I've been doing this stained glass thing long enough that that doesn't happen very often. And then there was that voice, you should go call her. So it was just a mistake, it didn't mean anything. And then I continued to go. Several moments later, I cut myself. And oh yes, I had gloves on. And then the voice, go call her. There was no explanations, there was no cajoling, just a simple request that I was not going to be allowed to ignore. God and I went around like this for several minutes, and in the 15 minutes, I broke 5 pieces of glass, cut myself 3 times. Fine, I'll call her. In 20 minutes, I was in the hospital next to her. I let her know that our family would be there until the end. And not only did I see her at the hospital, we chose to cancel our vacations that summer and be that friend that we prayed we would never need. I found out what God wanted me to do. I got to be that person she didn't have to cry to. She didn't have to elaborate on anything. She didn't have to explain it to me. She didn't have to discuss it with me. When things got too much with her family, she would come over and we would sit down and talk about anything and everything and nothing. She would tell me the story. She had the slideshow of her daughter. She would tell me the story for every single picture that was on that with a smile on her face. She would tell me how brave her daughter Sky had been. She was able to catch her breath. And then she would be able to go back to grieve with her family. I still consider this phone call one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, but I did it. And God made it clear to me that this was His work that I was doing. This one event opened my eyes to the power of God in my life. As I matured in my faith by reading the Bible and attending the Bible studies, I was hearing about God and how He used people to do things in their lives. Large, powerful things, moving mountains, and so on. But in this instance, He used me to move a very small mountain, and my entire perception of how God fit into my life was changed forever. Up to this point, I was the one that prayed to God, never actually expecting an answer. I probably believe God's voice was more like the large wind than the quiet whisper. I learned for me, in general, God's answers to my prayers with people. People are being put just in the right place at the right time. People offering me things that I had just prayed to God for. And I realized also that by doing God's work would almost certainly keep me out of any comfortable box I had put aside for myself. So you all know the stories, or most of you know the stories about our miracles in our lives with regard to Nathan beating cancer. So today, we're going to focus on things that pertain directly to this church and you, its congregation. Several years ago, my family moved from here to Florida. While I was in Florida, I was privileged enough to go on a single mission trip to Ecuador with a group called Dynamic Women in Mission. This trip had a significant impact on my view of God and how He was going to use me. Stepping back, I have to explain something about my family. Scott and I like to make plans. We plan things. We plan our future, we plan trips, we plan vacations, we plan holidays, and over the years, our plans change quite frequently and never come to the way we had set them down. So now we make plans in which we can deviate from. Most of the times things go different than we expected, but we always had a starting point and we always at least had a general direction. Our plan when we moved to Florida was that Scott would retire in Florida, he would get a job in the Air Force flying airplanes, and I would get to go on mission trips annually. Simple enough. And in my mind, it finally seemed like God's plan and my plans were coming together to some form of agreement that I was comfortable. So after a year, after going to Ecuador, we moved back here to Ohio. Now, while I love Ohio and I love you folks, there is no obvious way for me to continue the work in international missions, specifically going to Ecuador. That small, persistent voice kept telling me that we need to bring international missions here to Aley. While that sounds easy enough, I had no idea how it was going to happen. So I chose to do the one thing I knew how to do, and that was to pray on it. So my plan, from which we would deviate, was that somebody in this wonderful church would stand up one day and decide they wanted to go on an international mission trip, and that would be perfect. When that person arrived, I would be very helpful, I would be very supportive, I would do whatever I was told, and I would get to go back to Ecuador. And as usual, my plans and God's were very different. God's voice and methods can be very subtle, very easy to miss. And if you're not accustomed to seeing them and looking for them, you can miss them completely. Luckily for all of us, hindsight is an excellent learning tool, and we can always look back on events that have happened and see how God played roles in them in order to be able to then see Him as He is real time helping us. So let me walk through you all the steps that happened between returning to Ohio from Florida and the way that the team from Aley went down to Camp Hyatt in Ecuador. Once we got back to Ohio, Scott and I had decided that we really wanted to get more involved in this congregation. Since Nathan was healthy, we had more time on our hands. Scott was asked if he or I would be interested in working on a committee or getting involved in the council. Scott answered that he was very interested in working with the church council, but that I was not. He mentioned out loud that I had a heart for international missions. And there it was. The first time this statement had been made out loud and in public. Several months went by, Scott started working on the council, and I had progressed none at all of my task of having someone else here in this congregation lead an international mission trip. Then came Pentecost Sunday a couple of years ago. The Orianas were coming to town, and Gita was going to give the Sunday sermon. There was a committee meeting to discuss this and how to best treat them. I was invited as a guest to this meeting, I felt, probably because I was the one that had seen him most recently. I don't know if you know this, but Aley had a history with the Orianas. The team had gone there in 2009, 2008, and the church has been supporting them ever since. In fact, the very first time I ever saw the Orianas, they were up here in Aley giving a talk. 2 years later, I was down in Ecuador not realizing they were the same people. And that was a fun conversation putting those pieces together. During the meeting, we got to the discussion of Ecuador and the previous trips and how much everybody enjoyed it. And then someone made a statement. We should go back there. My mind started realizing why I was at this meeting. We were going to go back. One of these wonderful people in this room was going to stand up and they were going to volunteer to lead this trip, and I was going to get to go back to Ecuador. Right. Wait now. And then that voice started tapping me on the back of the head. Hold on, there's no way you're expecting me to do this. Discussion wasn't very long. Everybody quickly agreed that this would be a great idea. We should contact the Orianas, we should see what they need, we should get a team together from Aley, and we should go down there and support them. I'm not really sure how the decision was made. I'm not really sure if the question was ever asked. but it was very clear very early that I was the one that was going to lead this team to Ecuador. Now, as I mentioned earlier today, my qualifications to be a leader was a short list. I had been on a single mission trip, and it happened to be to Camp Hayatanga, Ecuador. That's it. That's my list. That was the qualifications. What I did know was that I had been praying for several months for a way to bring international mission trips here, and literally it was handed to me. I had zero idea how it was going to happen and how I was going to get it done, but I was 100% positive that this was God's voice talking to me. Now, for everybody else that in the room, it probably sounded like Keith Simpson, but for me, it was God answering my prayers. And I knew when it happened that that's what was going on. So I stayed very quiet. I did not say no, and I did not come up with all those excuses that I'm so very good at. So now my prayers changed from how do I bring international missions to Aley to how am I supposed to get this done? I didn't want to mess it up. And it turned out that I really didn't have the opportunity to mess it up. When things came up I didn't know how to handle, one of you guys stood up, helped me out, let me know how to do it, and trained me for the next time. We all got through it. The people appeared that needed to go on the trip. Perfect team presented itself. Preparation were difficult but successful. The outreach was created, all the ideas were implemented, and then we left for Ecuador last December. During team preparation, God and I had several of these conversations. At times, something would start gnawing at me. I would pray on it, present it to God, and then the right person and the answer would show up. I spent almost no time during team preparation worried, nervous, or anxious. God made it clear to me this was not my team, this was our team, and He was the boss. The number of examples of all these is way too much to list here, so we'll go on to the next one. So with this relatively calm team preparation, it came as a huge surprise to me of this sudden difficulty, anxiety that weighed heavily on me on our meditation time before the trip. We took these journals, these devotional journals with us. They had a 10-day preparation devotion, 10 days while you're on the trip, and then 10 days on your return. And it helps you walk through things that you need to resolve spiritually before you go. Every single night of the 10-day preparation, it came upon me that I was going to make this be a failure. Something I was going to do or not do was going to mess this up. And every night I would pray on it, I would hand it to God, and it would come back the next night. So this was very odd for me. And then the answer came to me. I need to find a way to set this team up that they didn't even need me. I needed to have it worked out that this team could be 100% successful whether I was there or not. I finally decided I needed to completely empower the team without me. So I wrote a list of the team members' names. I wrote down their strengths, their responsibilities, how I felt I could have, how I felt they could help. And I gave them all the information I had about their tasks. And then I gave them the go-ahead to just do it. Immediately, my worries were gone. I was no longer dwelling in my prayer time on how I was going to mess this trip up. So we went to Ecuador. 8 hours after we arrived, I got sick. A couple days later, I was completely incapacitated. This team of yours, they continued without me. They got all their work done. They got all their talks written. They got all their shows done, all their demonstrations, all the things they were going to show for the kids to explain to them who Jesus was and how much He loved them. They showed these 50 kids their love and God's love. They introduced them to Jesus and changed the kids' lives as well as their own. God knew what was in store for me, and He let me know how to deal with it. And by listening to them, things were just a little bit easier. So while in Ecuador, after deciding that I needed to come home early, I went to the house that we were staying in to pack up, and I had several very harsh words for God while I was there. And the response was consistently, "You are done, it's time to go home." So I did. So now let's move forward to this next mission trip we have coming up in June. This time we're planning on a work trip. We're going to go down and help the Orionas with the camp. As we saw last time, the buildings in the camp are always in disrepair. Due to the location and the climate, it's very difficult to keep them up. Now, while Guido is extremely talented, there is no way he can do everything by himself. They need support of churches from here in the States, people like us, to go down and help this camp run, keep this camp running. So we figured a work trip would be a pretty straightforward way to go down there for Aley to help the Orianas in their mission work. So I was just talking to the previous team members about going back to Ecuador in this work trip. They consistently had one question come back to me. What we were going to do to help the people there. Working on the camp is great, but the whole point of a mission trip is to help the people, is to bring God's love to the people. And what are we going to do about this? We're going to bring our hearts to Ecuador, not just our hands. We need an outreach. So my new prayers, God, please show me what kind of outreach you want us to do for the folks in Ecuador. I started this prayer several months ago, and God gave me the answer just a few weeks before Christmas. So once again, let's take a couple steps back and watch these events unfold. As we just talked when we went to Ecuador the last time, the trip was extremely successful. We had a great trip. We helped a lot of people and their families. But as a new leader, I had made several little mistakes that could have easily been avoided with a little effort. One of these things was, not surprisingly, the medical kit that we did not take with us. I realized that when you go on a trip, you never assume someone's going to get sick. And so you never even think about taking a comprehensive medical kit with you. It never even occurred to me. I took my medicine cabinet full of Advil and Tylenol and left that there with them, but I didn't have anything that was really substantial. When we got back to the States, I was talking to one of the two doctors that helped me while I was down there. One of them has gone on several medical mission trips, and he's like, there's a basic medical kit you should take with any mission trip if you go down. Great, let's take it next time. And so now that we're here, and we're getting to the point of preparing for this next trip, and in our serious planning phase, I emailed the doctor and I said, okay, what is this great medical kit that we should have so that I can put it together so we can be more prepared this next time? And his answer was, could a doctor find their way on your trip? Or maybe two doctors where both of them would come with us. So what do you do with a response like this? I need a medical kit, how about I send a doctor? Well, we run with it. First things first, are they serious? Do they really mean this? And after a little discussion, yes, they're very serious. And conveniently, as I just mentioned, very experienced in multiple medical mission trips, so I could avoid the panic attack of having no idea how to organize a medical mission trip. Next, did the Orianas need a medical team to come down to help? Now, Kim and I chat frequently, and I knew they had some kind of things, but I wasn't sure if they needed an entire medical team. So I got hold of Kim, and it just so happens that they're in desperate need of having a medical team come down and help evaluate the 50 children they're about to take on as part of their Compassion International outreach, and they had no idea how to do the initial medical evaluation of these 50 children and their parents, and conveniently June is exactly what we needed. As it is with God in my life, it is truly His voice. Things will proceed very quickly and very smoothly to some form of tangible plan. So over the next 24 to 36 hours, we had a complete medical team put together. 2 doctors, a dentist, a nurse, several patients in Ecuador that needed help. We even had the interpreters signed up ready to come down and help. All experience. Okay, if this is coming together so nicely, do we need to change from a work team to just a medical team? And their response was no. We need both. We've done this before. Folks from the medical team, if they get overwhelmed, they can stay at the camp for a day and do work stuff. Folks from the work team could go in if they're so called to work on the medical team. This one team, 2 objectives works very well, and that's the way we should proceed. And let me remind you, all of these plannings came together in a matter of 2 days. So this is quite a story, and I'm less surprised as it happens to us over and over again. Let's go back to our lesson and see how it applies to what we're talking about today. How do we know it's God's voice talking to us? Maybe it's just something we want to do. Maybe we're kind of forcing it, or it's just coincidence. How do we know it's really God's voice? Well, first was have a relationship with God. When I accepted Christ as my Savior in 2006, I had no idea what that meant, what a relationship with God looked like. Frequently during our Bible study at the time, we would come across some issue, and one of the ladies would love to say, just open the Bible, all the answers are in there. Now, while that may be true, for a new Bible reader, it's quite overwhelming. Where do you even start? And since then, I've spent several times reading several Bible studies and reading through the Bible and attending church, dwelling in His Word and learning as much as I can. And I'm starting to realize what she was trying to say. While I can't point out the Bible in verse, I knew as I was preparing today that someplace God talks in a quiet whisper. I know someplace if you have faith of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. So I'm moving along in that relationship with God. And I'm starting to learn what is my ideas and what is his. Second in our lesson was persistence. I've given you several examples here of how things appear to me. And it's always about persistence. When I have an idea that comes to me that sounds a little bit out of the ordinary, like, hey, go to Ecuador, I spend a lot of time praying on it. I talk to Scott about it. I come and talk to you guys at the church about it. I present my ideas. And even when I was breaking the glass over the mother and cutting myself, I took the time to sit down with Scott and discuss it with him. Because after all, everything I do will impact him and the family. And then there's circumstances and timing. This is always the most fun thing, how all those little pieces fit together and how all those things come together. When God puts a desire in my heart, is it his words or is it my idea? I do not fret or whether or not he'll get an answer. I know it'll come. I have complete faith that I will get an answer to the prayers and the questions that I have. That'll be obvious and I'll fit perfectly for all. So as with Elijah, the answer was obvious and quiet. And if I chose to ignore it or miss it, I could. When I accepted the comment from God, things proceeded quickly, smoothly, and seamlessly. And through it all, it was very easy for me to point out that this was not my work, it was God's, and I was doing it for him. All I had to do was be a conduit for his work. And it was really easy for me to say that. But let me clarify one thing. The work was not easy. Just giving God the credit was easy. The work was just possible. It went from impossible to possible. And in all these instances, it was something more than myself, and something I could not do without God's help. God is taking the seemingly impossible tasks, events, or desires of my heart, and he's making them quite tangible. So what is my point in all this? My point is that a two-way conversation with God is possible. And not only is it possible, but it's dependable. You can actually ask God for help, and he will give it to you. And the best part is when you're used to hearing and seeing this, and you see God come into this discussion early on, you get to watch him do his magic and his wonder real time as it's going on. So let's bow our heads in prayer. Dear God, I pray that you continue to talk to us and let us know what your plans are for us. I pray that you continue to have your hands in everyone's lives here and help them find that mission that you are calling them to do. Not all of us are to go to Ecuador. Some of us have missions here in Beaver Creek and that we need to fulfill for you. Please continue to speak to us and guide us. Come and take away the worries about doing things the right way, and let us pray about doing things your way. Amen. Okay, so now for the not-so-shameless plug. If any of you have heard, we're going to Ecuador this year in June. We're taking a work team and a medical team. We are having our first team formation meeting this Thursday here in the church, room 202. Please come. If you're interested in going, if you just want to see what's going on, if you want to support us here, please show up and participate. If Ecuador is not your calling and you have some other mission, go find it. Listen to what's in your heart and what God has placed there. And go look at it, say it out loud, tell somebody, share what you want to do, help be part of the missions of this church. Just realize that when you include God in your things, anything is possible.